Hello yet again, dear friends. I decided to do this very short, I always say short and it ends up longer than I intend, this very short video. Having been something of a student of metaphysics and paranormal, so-called, for many years, and having worked at the Natural History Museum in London, not in a scientific role but in a security role, but nevertheless in association with professional scientists. One of the things that has been in my mind for some years is differences in the way that people use terminology. I've said this in other videos that I've done. One of the reasons often why you may get people in the spiritualist movement who don't agree with people in the theosophical movement, who maybe don't agree with Christians or Hindus or Buddhists or Muslims, who don't agree with scientists. Very often they're talking about the same thing, even though they don't realize it. And one of the big problems is terminology, use of. Some people will use the term spirit. I've got an even better example. Thinking of a conversation I had a few days ago when somebody said to me, "Do you believe in angels?" And I replied to him, "Well, what do you mean by angels? Because angels is a generic term. Do you mean nature spirits or devas? Do you mean earth people who live on the higher realms of this earth? Are you talking about cosmic beings?" You see? And people will say, "No, I mean angelic beings." Yes, but when you're talking about angelic beings, you have to tie down what it is they actually are. There isn't a separate evolutionary classification of angelic beings. There are people in the on the higher planes of this earth that you might call angelic, because they're more evolved spiritually than maybe we are. There are people from other planets, I'll say that use the term people, from other planets in this system, and I could name some of them, and I have done. And we would call them angelic. There are nature spirits that control the vast storm systems and control, like vast forests. Something like the Amazon rainforest. And you've got nature spirits or devas who are controlling that, making it possible. And you could call them angelic. So when you use terminology in metaphysics or spirituality or the paranormal, you have to really have clear in your own mind what the terminology you are using means. So one of the things I wanted to do was, just to the best of my ability and understanding, is to tie down some of the terminology. I am going to bring this into context, and that context may not be either understood or agreed with by other people. All I can say is that for 35 years I have been something of a student, not the best student in the world, but something of a student of a quite advanced yoga master from Britain, from England, who is known as Sir George King. That individual is he's passed on now, he's left us in 1997, but while he was still here, he was, to call him a pretty advanced yogi master is really an understatement. He delivered himself, from his own understanding, his teachings, and those of beings who are millions of years senior to him while he was in samadhic trance, or when he went out to give lectures, which he sometimes did. This was a man who knew what he was talking about. And sometimes people who will disagree with something, somewhere down the line will have to admit, I'm afraid that was right, but because of my limited understanding, I didn't appreciate what the person was saying was right, you know. And to the best of my ability, what I'm going to be saying is as near right as I can get at my stage, but based on the teachings of the greatest masters who've ever graced this earth, you know, rather than the opinion of somebody who lives down the road. You know, there's quite a difference. There can be millions of years of evolution difference. So let's look at some of the terminology. First of all, one term that is very misused is spirit. You may get people, and please, I'm not tarring everybody with the same brush, I'm just generalizing here, okay? Some people in the spiritualist movement, if they hold a seance, may say we have a spirit present. You know what they mean by that. But what technically is spirit? It is actually a definite term, it's not a generic term. Spirit is non-physical consciousness. That creative force behind everything is spirit. We use a term like God. God in its unmanifested state is spirit, non-physical consciousness. It actually exists, but not in what we would call a physical state, and we call it spirit. I must just throw in there, I have never liked, and I do not like, I actively do not like that term Holy Ghost, which tends to be used a lot. It's not a very nice phrase, but spirit, yes. Because spirit is not physical, and I've said again this in my other videos too, and because everything that you or I can pick up on, whether using the five basic senses or the senses in the subtle bodies, senses that we may regard as psychic, whatever we pick up, by whatever method, that the stimuli that we pick up on always comes into the consciousness through physical sense mechanisms. If you consider that the desk is physical, the world around you is physical, then when I say physical, I'm referring to physical in that context that we would regard as physical, because ultimately nothing is physical, it's all illusion. As David Icke quite rightly points out, it isn't real, but we think of it as physical. Okay, so all of your different bodies on different planes of vibration that you personally have, if you're living in this world now, you're using at least 7 completely different bodies, all of which have their own sense mechanisms, and you only pick up stimuli from outside of yourself through sense mechanisms which, if that is physical, they are physical. So if something is not physical, you cannot detect it. You have no sense mechanism built into you to pick up spirit. It's completely undetectable. So when someone at a seance might say we have a spirit present, what they really should be saying is, maybe, we have a discarnate person who is present. Because, again, if that is physical, when a person passes on and they live on the other side, as some would say, they are still inhabiting a physical body made of atoms, molecules, cells. It's a physical body affected by gravity. It has weight and mass, but is probably vibrating on an energy level in a completely different frequency range. So you have to get that right. Spirit is non-physical consciousness. God itself is in its unmanifested state. It is non-physical consciousness. There are 3 words which one comes across during one's studies. Very simple words, but they can have a very profound concept behind them. 3 words which describe different aspects of God, the creative force we call God. God brought forth manifestation. I'm trying to correct all this terminology. God brought forth manifestation, and the whole cosmos is God in manifestation. There isn't anything but God. It doesn't exist as something separate to you. It is all that is. There isn't anything but God. How else can God be all-present, all-powerful, all-knowing? I mean, if it's all-present, immediately you get something which is not God. God becomes mostly present. If God is all present, there can't be anything else. So all manifestation is God. So the whole cosmos and everything it contains is God in manifestation. It is this. This is God in manifestation. You have God which is behind manifestation and is not manifest. That is God which brought forth this. And then you have God in its entirety, both manifest and unmanifest, it. So I've got a sense of humour. If somebody asks you what God is, and you've got that sort of humorous bent in your character, you can give them the best description that is possible, and you can say that it is this and that. Absolutely true. God is this and that. It is this and that. You can't get a better description of God than that. You know, looking at what I've just said, but they probably won't understand what you mean, and they'll think you're taking the, you know, which of course you're not. This is what a meditation is. It's a phrase which has an inner meaning that you have to get out for yourself. You know, it's not always obvious on the surface. So I just thought I'd throw in it, God in its entirety, this, God in manifestation, and that, God which is behind manifestation. You know, like when Moses asked a God, not the God, you know, what are you? I am that. You know, that phrase, I am that I am, it is actually a meditation in itself, and it can take up a lot of thought, because there are so many hidden meanings in there, very profound meanings in that one small group of words. When God brought forth manifestation, you know, and it became this manifestation, it, for reasons best known to itself, it projected, as it were, parts of itself into that manifestation, and you can imagine it. This is not a very good analogy, but it has got its uses. If you imagine a jellyfish with tendrils hung down, you know, the tendrils are all part of the jellyfish, but they're hanging down separately. You can imagine God, the creative force, putting tendrils of consciousness into manifestation. Each one of those tendrils of consciousness is actually still directly connected to the one creative source itself. It is God, but it is God which is giving the impression, you might say, of individualizing. And because they are, as it were, made of the same stuff, if you look at my video on the Lord's Prayer in the Solar System, which is also on YouTube, this will be explained in a little more detail. But God, that creative force called God, is referred to as the Father, because the two energies in the cosmos are male positive creative, female negative preservative. Male is creative, female is preservative. So when God brought forth the cosmos, it became the Father of all manifestation. So it brought forth its children in terms of tendrils of consciousness that it projected into this vast visualization. Because they're made of the same stuff, they are what some call sons of God. They are the children which came forth from God. But in metaphysics you still use the male when something is manifested, in the same way as that you do for that which brings forth manifestation. The Father brings forth the Son, because it's male positive creative. So of course there's no one single Son of God, the only Son of God. That's just a sales gimmick. that was introduced into a certain religious movement to get people under the Roman thumb, you know, and people believed it because they didn't know the basic principles, and so they fell for it. There isn't a one and only Son of God. Every life form which is a discrete individual has as part of its makeup spirit, and your own, as you might say, personal spirit is your Son of God. You have the Son of God within you, and it's your individual non-conscious, not conscious, there's a Freudian slipway, non-physical consciousness or spirit. So God the Father, which is the creative force, brought forth its children, the sons of God. This is where the terminology should be used, or in the way in which it should be used. Those individual consciousnesses projected into manifestation. Now, as any student of metaphysics will know, we're looking specifically at this earth at the moment. Around and permeating this earth there are 7 quite natural planes, realms or worlds, all just as physical as that, except the subtle planes from one to another are vibrating at an energy level in different frequency ranges, which allows them to coexist in the same space. They interpenetrate one another but are vibrating at different frequency, in different frequency ranges. When spirit, which had an urge within it to gain experience in manifestation, when it came, I wanted to say in contact with, but remember it's not physical. When it came in contact with matter, it was able to, as it were, pass through the highest plane of vibration, plane 7, and became aware of plane 6, which was vibrating slightly slower. Excuse me. But realized although there were even slower planes of vibration, the influence was so reduced, its willpower, its effectiveness using its willpower was so reduced that the only way it could move, as it were, onto a lower plane of vibration than 6 was to produce a body which would work like a relay station, so it could pick up the subtler influences from spirit and then use physical energies to cause movement on the planes below. And spirit brought forth a body which we refer to as the soul, or some theosophists call the monad, on plane 6, the monadic plane. And the soul is the real you, not this thing. The soul on plane 6 is the real you. Okay? And it, like God has brought forth its manifestation, so the soul body, which can feel this urge to gain experience in all states of matter, over a long period of time, using willpower, brought forth body and body and body on slower and slower planes of vibration, so that it could gain experience on all of these slower vibrating planes. And you and I, as we are now, we are a soul body on plane 6, which is the real being, the highest aspect, the first aspect, as some would say. And then there are 6 bodies distributed over 5 planes below that in terms of vibration, not spatially below, in slower vibrating matter, of which this body is the lowest, the slowest vibrating. Okay? So the soul body brought forth its children. So some people using terminology would, using this type of terminology, would refer to, for example, the vast panorama of the stars and the planets, you know, the suns, as the heavens. In a different context, people refer to the higher planes above this one, in terms of vibration, also as heavens. Because the soul brought forth its children, its lower bodies, you can say the soul is my Father, which is in heaven. the soul body on plane 6 is my Father which is in heaven, as opposed to the Sun which brought the solar system into being, and the Son is our Father which art in heaven. You see? And you've got to be careful there. The Son is our Father which art in heaven. My soul body is my Father which is in heaven. When Jesus actually said, my Father has sent me, my Father which is in heaven, he wasn't talking about God, he was talking about his own soul body, which is on the higher planes of Venus, the bright and morning star, which is where he came from, as did Buddha before him, as did the Sanat Kumara before him, and others. I can probably name at least 10 individuals who came to this earth from Venus. Okay? So, you have God the Father, the Creator. The sons of God are the individual spirits coming into manifestation, although they themselves don't manifest, but they affect manifestation, creating soul bodies. The soul bodies then produce their children, the slower vibrating bodies on different planes. So the soul is my Father which is in heaven. You have 6 bodies, including the one you're currently sat in, and I'm including this body with its aura as one body at the moment. The body on the basic physical plane, which is a solid, liquid and gas with an etheric and supraetheric aura. Okay, and I'm calling that 1. So that's body 1. On the astral realms, the next plane up in terms of vibration, not spatially up because it's here, you have your emotional or astral body. On plane 3, in the solid, liquid and gas and etheric matter of plane 3, you have what is known as the lower mental body. And the lower mental body on plane 3, the astral body on plane 2, and the basic physical body on this plane, plane 1, they form the lower self, or the personality. And they are all centered on each other here. So you've got the basic physical body, then around it is the aura permeating it, around that and permeating it is the astral body, and then around that and permeating that is the lower mental body. And those 3 are the lower self, or the personality. Now plane 3 is the plane of mental vibration, and is known by the Sanskrit word manas. The word man is a diminutive of manas. Man is supposed to be the thinking animal. And so in the supraetheric and atomic, subatomic matter of plane 3, you have what is known as the higher mental body, but it's not necessarily centered on this. It might be displaced, by thousands of miles. It's not necessarily centered on this. Okay, so the 3 bodies of the lower self, the personality, are like the son of man, the son of Manas, the son of the body on in the higher, more subtle states of matter on plane 3. So this is the Son of Man. But sometimes when Jesus was asked, are you the Son of God, he would say, I am the Son of Man. Which what he meant was he's using a basic physical, astral and mental body, lower mental body, like we are, But he had been brought, that body had been brought into being for use by higher aspects of consciousness which were not even on this planet, which originated on the bright and morning star, which is where he said he came from. Of course he did. And that is Venus, from the higher planes of Venus. But you yourself, you have the higher mental body in the more subtle grades of matter on plane 3. You have a higher body still on plane 4, which some people, using English terminology rather than the Sanskrit, some people call it the intuitive body. It's a body which handles super consciousness. Rather than just mental vibrations, it can channel super conscious vibrations. On plane 5 you have another body, some call it the higher spiritual body, which is a higher level still of super consciousness. So that spiritual body on plane 5, the got it, intuitive body on plane 4, and the higher mental body on plane 3, they are centered on each other, and they form the higher self, or the ego. Okay? And you have your soul body on plane 6, which is the real you, the highest aspect of you in manifestation. So just look at that terminology now and you can see exactly what it relates to. You have God the Father, God the Creator, which is not physical, as spirit of course. It put forth aspects of itself into its visualization that we call manifestation, and each one of those is a son of God, because they're made of the same stuff as the creative force. In other words, non-physical consciousness. Each one of those non-physical consciousnesses or spirits uses a body on the subtle planes of this earth, for example, sticking to this earth for now, and we call that the soul body, my Father which is in heaven. Beneath the soul body on slower planes of vibration, you have 6 bodies in 2 groups of 3. The 3 bodies of the higher self, 3 bodies of the lower self. You see. So, the lower self, also known as the Son of Man, or the Son of Manas, which is the higher mental body on plane 3, the son of that. I'm just trying to think what are the terminology. There are many different words which are being used in the wrong way. One of the words which should actually be totally removed from the dictionary, from the vocabulary, is supernatural. It suggests that something is above nature, and that's absolutely ludicrous, of course. I'm sure some scientists who listen to this, if they ever do, will be pleased to hear me say that everything that exists in the cosmos at whatever state, whatever type of phenomena, will, if they can't yet, will ultimately be explainable in terms of science and numbers. Everything happens within nature, you know. So you may get things which are out of your normal experience and you say they're paranormal, but they're not supernatural. Everything happens within nature. But man on earth is so primitive. We are literally just above the animals, and we sometimes think we've got such a tremendous science, and I can sum it up. There are 2 phrases that come to mind, and I will quote these. A known Venusian, some people who know me will know who I'm referring to, a known Venusian, quite an evolved being, showed his sense of humour back in the 1950s, and I have available a direct quote from him. One of the things he said was, "Forgive me for smiling, but a so-called expert on your television last night said if there is life on Venus it must be very primitive. Yes indeed, we are very primitive, but not as primitive as the man who made that statement." That same individual on a different occasion, and I'm going to paraphrase this, I can't quote it 100% word for word, but I'll give the gist of what he said. He basically implied the evolutionary journey from an earthworm to an earthman is nowhere near as far as from an earthman to where I am. And when you're talking about that level of evolution, that is the sort of level that your Jesuses and your Buddhas come from. Buddha, of course, is on the earth at the moment, came back in 1956 and is now resident on the earth. Jesus has visited many times over the centuries, and particularly in the late 1950s into the 1960s he was very active. He probably still is, but you don't get to hear about it so much these days now. And in 1958 he gave an extension to his Sermon on the Mount in Fulham, London, through the yogic mediumship. Note that, not spiritualistic mediumship. Through the yogic samadhic mediumship of Sir George King, Jesus gave an extension to his Sermon on the Mount, which is published under the title of The 12 Blessings. If you want to know more about that, contact me and I'll point you in the right direction where you can get a copy of this for yourself. And we've even got the audio recordings of it, not just the transcript. In my shelves there I have some recordings, cassettes and CDs, on which I have actual audio recordings of Jesus giving the 12 blessings. So rather than depending on somebody else telling me what he said, I can just listen to the recording. I know exactly what Jesus said, complete with intonation and inflection. So you don't have to depend on someone's say-so, anymore. And that's why it was done. So you can hear almost first-hand what Jesus said without having to depend on anyone else telling you. So, is there any other terminology? One word which is absolutely, it's totally used in the wrong context as far as millions of people are concerned, and that is meditation. There are probably millions of people in Britain alone, which is where I am, I'm in London, who say, oh, I do meditation. What is meditation? Meditation is an advanced trance state where the body is placed, either sat one way or another so that it's stable, and the consciousness is controlled using great concentration so that the serpent power at the base of the spine, the kundalini, can be raised up the spine to a high chakra or psychic center, making the lower parts of the body totally immobile, virtually in a state of living death. So all of your energies are transferred into your conscious awareness. And although the body can't physically move at all, when you're in true meditation, you can project from the body and you have complete freedom. Meditation is an advanced state. Now, some people get the stages leading up to that in the wrong order. I had a very good teacher, Sir George King, and we'll put the stages in correct order. You can't do anything unless you develop concentration. You have to be able to decide on something and apply your consciousness to that and keep it there. Concentration. First stage. Without that, you, I, or anyone else are going nowhere. Concentration. And it can take days, years, lives to develop a decent amount of concentration. It can do. Doesn't always, but it can do. Once you have developed the ability to concentrate, and you can look at an object or a thing, a manuscript, or a painting, whatever it might be, look out into space, look at your computer, look at anything, and you keep your mind there. When you're used to doing it, and you don't have to put, shall we say, undue effort into the concentration, you get used to concentrating, you start to realize that information is coming back to you about that thing, whether it's a physical object or a concept, that wasn't blatantly obvious in the first instance, and you start to contemplate on that thing, and you learn all sorts of things about it that you didn't realize first off, and you develop contemplation, which is the second stage. After years or possibly lives of disciplined yoga, and I'm not talking about hatha yoga with your ankles behind your neck, I'm talking about visualization, breath control, concentration, contemplation, and you eventually learn how, in a safe way, and preferably with correct guidance, you learn how to consciously bring the serpent power at the base of the spine up the spine. You raise the kundalini, which should never be attempted unless you have, certainly not for ordinary people, should never try it, unless you have somebody there who is monitoring you and knows what they're doing, because you can do yourself a major mischief if you get it wrong. You can kill yourself quite easily if you get it wrong. It's probably the reason a lot of people don't try it, because it can be dangerous unless you've got correct guidance. Sorry, that's where I'm up to there. But yes, raising the Kundalini, as it rises up the spine, each chakra below the level you have reached will close down, and the body below that point is totally immobile. And you bring the energies in the spine up to a high level, so your body is physically incapable of movement. And you can either, or you can do a number of things, not just either means one or the other. You can do a number of things, one of which of course is to project from the body when it's in that state, and you've got complete freedom of movement out of the body. You can apply it to conscious awareness, or use conscious awareness, and you can pick up on things that are normally well outside of your normal capability to comprehend. You know, you can meditate upon something to the point you get so much information back from it that you virtually become one with the thing that you're meditating on. So meditation is a phrase which is often misused. I would think 90+%, it's probably higher than that, of the people who say they meditate don't. What they do they call meditation, but technically it is not meditation. And we really need to tie these terms down to specific meanings, and then the Buddhists will know what the spiritualists mean, and vice versa. The scientists will know what the Christians are talking about. You have to tie the terminology down to specific meanings and try not to use generic terms. As I said, like angels. What do you mean by angels? You could get a storm diva, or a set of storm divas, who are controlling a hurricane travelling across the Atlantic Ocean. Those storm divas, beings of unbelievable power. I'm going cold, I think I've got a present here. You know, they can be regarded as angels. They control storms. Some of them control unbelievably vast bodies of water, the vast oceans. It doesn't just move around on its own. There are divas, nature spirits, who control that body of water, control weather systems. And then smaller ones who control growth of vegetation, like your fairies and your elves, and the gnomes, which can move through ground, through solid rock as easy as you move through air, and control ground movements, and the sylphs in the air, and the salamanders of fire, and there are others, you know. People say fairies, you know, but you can take fairies as being a generic term. What specifically do you mean by fairies? Some people may refer to elves as fairies, you know. Some of them do look human vaguely, you know, like small humans. Some of them don't. I'll just mention one other thing, and then I'll call it quits, because this wasn't intended to be a long video. If you have a candle flame, just raising my hand so you can see it, I'm not putting my finger up to it. If you imagine that's a candle flame, okay, and you're in a dark room with a candle flame lit, and you've got the normal shape of flame, if you look just above the tip of the flame, you may be able, in the darkness, you may be able to see a little grey patch just hovering around above the flame. And I am told, because I'm not psychic enough to be able to confirm this for myself, but I'm told that that is a salamander. It is a diva of fire. It's a living, breathing, conscious being. And through correct ritual, you can cause a diva, by law, to come into your presence. Like when you strike a match on the side of a matchbox, providing all conditions are right, it's not just a chemical reaction, you're actually performing a magic ritual. And if that ritual is performed correctly, that, or a deva of fire, has to come into your presence by law. It has to come. Now you have to, it's no big problem with that, you know, when you're dealing with a tiny little bit of fire on the end of a match. But you don't control it right and you could burn a building down, you know, because the devas work strictly according to law. They don't have likes and dislikes the way that we do. And having mentioned the devas and invoking a deva, one of the reasons why some of the ritual is so closely guarded, so it's so secret, is because there are certain natural laws that come into play, one of which is if you invoke the presence of a deva, or you start a ritual involving a deva, certainly beyond a certain amount of energy, you know, a certain size of deva, you might say, or potency of deva, if you get that ritual wrong, or you don't follow it through, you die. Simple as that. You've got to get it right, or you could do yourself a big mischief. So this is why it's so closely guarded, for the protection of people, so they don't kill themselves or injure themselves. You can tell this is a bit of a waffle. I've just thought of one final thing, which I will mention as an example, then it will definitely be the end of the video. Many years ago, the man I regard as my teacher, Sir George King, was then living in the Fulham Road, Fulham, London, and was in bed sick. I think it was a Saturday morning, I think it was. And through his window, looking out at the street, you know, the sky above the street, on a Saturday morning, I think it was, the sky went absolutely black. And he saw this storm coming in over West London. And being the compassionate person he was, he thought, if that storm breaks, you know, there'll be a tremendous amount of water. A lot of people in basement flats are going to get flooded out. Because of his abilities, because of his experience, he knew what to do. And he performed the necessary ritual which brought the deva of that storm into his room, and it appeared in the room. And I believe it was described as being like a candle flame, but magenta in colour and quite large. A male deva, and I believe, going from memory, it was magenta in colour, and don't quote me on this, but I think it was something like 5 or 6 foot tall, this flickering magenta flame. And that was the deva, the nature spirit, that was controlling this storm. Now, if George King had got the ritual wrong or stopped, he would have killed himself. Like that. Not that deva was evil, the deva works according to law, and that's the law. You've got to follow it through and get it right. So, George King actually gave this deva the right energies in the right way, completed the ritual, and the deva disappeared. And the storm just went out, dissipated over the North Sea. It went out away from the land and dissipated over the sea. You know, so you can do things like that, but you've got to know what you're doing. Anyway, I started off talking about terminology and ended up on devas. So there are a lot of people out there who know a lot more about this than I do. I'm only just skirting around with the basics of it, but when one starts to study any subject, no matter what it is, you have to admit that whatever stage you've got to, and even if it's not very high, there are still millions of other people out there who don't even know that on that subject. So this is for the benefit of anyone, should there be anyone who knows less than me. But I have done 35 years of study under the right teacher, so under the best teacher. So hopefully somebody somewhere out there will get some benefit from this. Thank you very much, and again, I hope that's of interest.